Okay, so we are still in Lebanon and we are in my first full day. In Arabic, the land for this region is Mashriq, meaning the land where the sun rises. The name is derived from the verb sharaka, which means to shine, illuminate, radiate. And when day broke, the sun rose, illuminating the space between buildings, casting shadows and spreading light. Beirut is believed to be one of the oldest inhabited cities in the world, tracing its foundation back over 5,000 years to the time of the Phoenicians. Since then, it has been home to Greeks, Romans, Arabs, and Ottomans. For centuries, Beirut has served as a gateway to the east, an invitation to the west, and the crossroads between three continents. As it was my first time in the Middle East, I walked with quiet trepidation through the empty streets. All the shops were closed, none of the windows open. Lebanon is no place for early risers. It awakens like a cat from a nap, stretching and yawning away the night without care of rushing into the day. Then it starts slowly with a cup of coffee, perhaps even two, before the day can truly begin. Outside, the air was full of what only spring can promise, an unbounded continuation of life. Jacaranda trees bloomed full and the world was colored purple, even the sky. In Beirut, the smell of jasmine swept through the streets with such sweet suddenness that I had to stop and beg for this spring to stay forever, if only just to remember this heavenly gift. The whole of that first day was spent meandering through the streets of Beirut. Pardon me. Climbing up and down steep stairs colored in with graffiti in Arabic, French, and English that called for truth and cried for freedom. We all have graffiti like that, don't we? I didn't write that in the book. That's just my add-on right here. By eventide, I found myself as far as the sea to watch the sun sink into the Mediterranean. Along the Corniche, a ledged road separating the city from the sea, women with heads covered and uncovered laughed and posed for selfies in the fading light. Fathers played soccer with their daughters, young boys fished, casting their lines into the cobalt waters, hoping to catch something in their lures. Among the rocks, old men sat at small tables, playing cards as they smoked cigarettes, perhaps as they have done their whole lives and would continue to do until the end. When the sun touched the sea, the city erupted in a song ushered from the surrounding mosques. It was the Adhan, the Muslim call to prayer. The first phrase was familiar, Allahu Akbar. What followed, the Shahada, less. It echoed from the minarets that lit green in the twilight and was carried like wind across the city. All around, life went on, but for me, the world slowed except for the tears that rushed down my cheeks, flushed with fever for a God I had never known. In India, the Adhan must have been missed, but to miss it now in Beirut would have been impossible, and I might promise myself to listen for it always and never miss it again. The sky darkened, the sun set, but never had I felt so surrounded by light. The next day was no different, and more hours were spent walking back and forth the length and width of the city. Before the Lebanese Civil War began in 1975, Beirut was deemed the Paris of the East. Interesting concept here. We're going to go back to this. I'm going to start discussing things that need to be discussed. We're going to go back on this, but just remember 1975. Maybe you guys look up what happened in the UN in 1975 that might allow Lebanon to be considered the Paris of the East, and why war might have begun in 1975. So let's start again. Sorry. All my asides. I have so many thoughts running through my head, I can't even keep track of them all, but we're going to go with it anyway. The next day was no different, and more hours were spent walking back and forth the length and width of the city. Before the Lebanese Civil War began in 1975, Beirut was deemed the Paris of the East, but 15 years of war destroyed much of the city, and what remained was still being rebuilt physically, emotionally, and politically. At first, it was difficult to believe that there had been a war. So vibrant were the streets of Beirut that it was almost easy to forget. Almost until stumbling upon buildings riddled with bullets on the verge of collapse. There were no roofs, there were no windows, there were only broken doors that have not been entered or exited since. Stand in front of these houses and only war might be remembered and nothing else. I wondered if studied long enough, might a polemicist be able to ascertain what year of the war these walls had been penetrated? Was it the beginning, the middle, or the end? Was it the first bullet or was it the last? And yet, from the foundation of these houses without walls grew trees, their leaves green with spring, their limbs and crowns spreading like ceilings. Enough cracks had been created for life to seep through again. For hours I walked the streets of Beirut. One side of the city rang with church bells and the other muezzins. Even years after the Civil War, Beirut is still divided along religious lines, separating the past from the future, making it difficult to tell which is more uncertain. The same uncertainty is found in the sidewalks of Beirut, which vary in width from the very narrow to the very wide. Often they change in a matter of steps, which make walking in Beirut both a challenge and an adventure. In the first week, I took up an old pastime of mine whose legality is questionable back in the United States: jaywalking. It is, after all, the only way to maneuver the sidewalks that end just as suddenly as they begin. The light of Beirut also shifts like the sidewalks, creating shadows where there once was sun and offering light where there is darkness. But the way is illuminated more than it is obscured, and where I thought I might encounter hostility, I was met instead with smiles from soldiers, the curiosity of children, and the gift of a magnolia blossom from a stranger on the street. All of this ensured the impossibility of superficiality in Lebanon. For to enter this country is to step into the very heart and soul of this land, plunging into unimaginable depths and never again wanting to resurface. So warm was the welcome of Beirut, so fervent its embrace, that somehow, finally, the past and future collapse into the present, rendering any notion of time unnecessary, which is why in Beirut it is important to be present. Always present, because that is where the beauty lies. Thereafter, every day was more of the same, except more warmth, more smiles, more food, and more generosity than ever imagined. It was more than enough to make you wonder how one side of the world could be so very different than the other. All of this kindness almost surprised me, because days before my departure, my aunt forwarded me a warning issued by the State Department advising citizens of the United States not to travel to Lebanon. Motherfuckers. That's not in the book. I just added that. And yet here I was, weeks later, happy not to have listened to a woman who loved me the only way she knew how, in one piece. Would that I could tell her that I never had I felt so whole.